a culture is going to happen. And the question is, are you in charge of it, or is it going to nail you down for a while until you...
You found your way to the Winning Tactics podcast with host Adam Sinkus. Adam discusses winning tactics with small business owners and entrepreneurs, uncovering processes and introducing the tools and solutions for enhancing the bottom line. Thanks again for finding your way to the Winning Tactics podcast. And now your host, Adam Sinkus.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. It is another wonderful day for the Winning Tactics podcast. I'm excited today because we are talking about one of my favorite subjects, something that I think gets thrown into this fire of buzzwords that we hear in the business world, but totally is not a buzzword when it's done right. And we are here talking about culture today. So excited to bring my guest on the show, Dr. Joni Carley. Welcome to the show. So glad to have you on.
Wonderful to be here, Adam. Thanks for inviting me.
Not a problem. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So I consult and speak and write about values-driven leadership and cultural transformation. And I do that from a broad perspective. I've been all over the world studying and learning from all kinds of interesting people about human potential and about what causes what, about what makes things happen and what produces results. And I consult with leaders of nonprofit organizations and businesses, and also do some consulting at the United Nations. And I'm the author of The Alchemy of Power. This is called Mastering the Invisible Factors of Leadership. And that's where I talk about Mojo.
I love it. It is totally on my list to order that book and get a read on that because it sounds just super interesting to me. I am a leadership junkie myself, and I think one of the fallacies that a lot of people have is that culture just kind of happens, and it and it does to a point, but I think it's a lot more intentional than that in the companies that are doing it well.
Well, it can be intentional or not. That's choice. It's going to be there, right? It's like fish in water. They're going to be swimming in something, right? Or they're not going to be fish. So it's there. The question is, how conscious are you of it? And how conscious are you of your capacity to impact it and cause results?
Yeah, that's really interesting perspective on it, and what I think makes it's so important for small businesses to really start thinking about this from the time they start hiring their first employees to their first customers to really get a grasp on what they want their culture and subsequently values and mission and all that, all those other important pieces to it to be. But how do you start defining your culture in an organization?
First of all, you're so right about that, Adam, because oftentimes, especially in the startup mode, I mean, let's face it, who's got an ounce of bandwidth, right? To mix my metaphors, but, who really, and people tend to think that it's going to come later, that it's a luxury to think about culture, that, I'll get to it when I handle all the emergencies. Well, guess what? There's a lot less emergencies when you manage a culture right. So, and it really does need to be done from day one. Like I said, a culture is going to happen. And the question is, are you in charge of it, or is it going to nail you down for a while until you manage it? So consciously managing it from day one, being clear about it, and staying accountable for it, there's nothing like it. And the data is very clear on that.
So let's drive into that a little bit, because I think the data is important. I think it helps bring some context to the importance of culture. What are some of the major statistics you've seen about how culture impacts organizations?
Well, like you named this after a Peter Drucker quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And we know that my book has, I don't even know how many pages of references of studies on culture, on the impact of culture. I mean, there's just so many studies worldwide. There's too many to even mention. No matter what they're studying, it generally goes better when the culture is stronger. If you think about it like a culture in a lab dish, right? It's going to grow some things, but it won't grow other things. And so an organizational culture is the same way. It's going to grow vitality and profitability and strength and good practices and, being good community members, or it's not. And when it's not, that's when you get things like, bad product or bad services, or start to get employees showing up, not showing up, or being there, and it doesn't matter because if they haven't shown up, a big part of themselves hasn't shown up. So, you want to build a culture that's where people can bring their whole selves to work. And that's really what it takes. And that takes checking in with who these people are and what they want to build.
I absolutely love that. In every organization I've been in that I would say has a really good, positive, strong culture. One of the things that has been critical in those successes is how leadership views the people that contribute to the organization. And so it's always been fascinating to tie down how leadership impacts, how the difference of performance can happen from what I would refer to as a boss to a leader occurs, and what happens on those teams subsequently. What has been your experience in the impact of leaders in an organization to the culture?
Leaders who understand the value of values are powerful leaders, because that gets to what I get out of my book about mastering the invisible factors of leadership. These are metaphysical factors. Metaphysics is the science and the philosophy of causality. So it's the study of what causes what. And so when we look at the deeper levels of what's actually producing results, we find that culture is primal. Values are primal. And by the way, even more primal than genetics, according to twin studies. People are driven by their values. Cultures are created by collections of values. Excuse me, values are the building blocks of cultures. So, people collect together based around a particular set of values. Now, some of those, they may be unspoken, they may be conscious. That's the work I do, is we actually quantify a culture. We measure culture by quantifying the values, and then we come out with real data on 7 levels of culture. And we have a place where, you are now where you want to be, and we can track that over time. We can track how well aligned people are with the culture. And we can track what we call potentially limiting values. So if your culture includes a lot of fear-based behaviors like gossip or information hoarding or, lying, those kinds of things, then you're not going to have that culture that grows, lots of energetic, happy people who are working together. The culture that is most conducive to people doing their best, and by the way, making the most money. I mean, no matter what social or economic indicators you measure, when you pay attention to culture and values, the indicators go up. That's how powerful the data is. It's pretty much across the board, but certainly in the private sector and in business, there's just nothing. You have no other tool more powerful than this. But we have what I call the fluffy myth. That's a problem. And the fluffy myth is this idea that values and culture and how people are doing, all that stuff is fluffy, inconsequential stuff that we'll get to after the important stuff like profits are managed. But there's no data that substantiates that myth. There just is none. And really quite the contrary, because like I said, we really know that these things are not fluffy in any way. They may be metaphysical, they may be intangible. And but if you think about like an iceberg, 90% of the iceberg is below the surface. So the same, physicists tell us 95% of our reality they have no clue about. We're only functioning with 5%. So somewhere in that 95% of most of the mysterious is our metaphysical factors. And just because we don't have a complete grasp of them doesn't mean they should be ignored. I mean, really ignore them at your own peril, and especially with where the world is going right now, because as we're building back out of COVID, people, and as millennials are taking their place in the workplace, people have a lot less tolerance for the old garbage stuff that leaders used to think, well, not, like you say, you distinguish between bosses and leaders. Bosses used to think they could throw at people. Just, yeah, it doesn't, it's not going to work anymore. And bosses are going to find themselves blindsided by their own irrelevance because the world is moving on.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I love that. And I've dove deep into how modern society has changed the look of leadership. Because the average job, the average person is staying in a job no more than about 4 years anymore. Pensions are a thing of the past. A 401k is completely transferable for the most part. And so all the things that used to keep people at a job for 20, 30 years are no longer factors, which means that these bosses can no longer hold that over your head to go, you got to stay here so you get your pension so that you can survive life after work, and it's like, and so what's happened is the newer workers are starting to hold leadership accountable for the things that they say. And that's the dynamic that we're seeing change so much.
And for more than that, they're holding them accountable for what they say. Yeah, that's just a basic, but they're holding them accountable for building better workplaces is a way to build a better world. So people are wanting more than just having produced the services or widgets by the end of the day. They want to know that they're good world citizens, that they're good community members, that their work didn't go to poison some kid, at the end of the day, that what's coming out of their factory isn't hurting anybody, that they did no harm at work, and not only did no harm, but made it a little better world, even if it's not a whole lot, just did something real good.
Yeah, it's interesting. Societal impact, I think, is something that definitely contributes in the space of culture. So many organizations now have paid leave for employees to go do volunteer work and contribute to the community in direct ways. That a lot of companies are doing donation matches for nonprofits now too, which I think is really, really cool as well. It's changing the face of how we do business in a functional level, in my opinion.
We measure on 7 levels, and kind of universal greatest good is the 7th level. The first level is, are there profits? Are the lights on? Is everybody safe? Just kind of basic, right? Yeah. And in between there, we get best practices. We get, is the organization kind of transforming itself from the inside? Is it staying fresh and ahead of the curve? Is it building mentorship and partnership within? Is it building partnership within the community in a larger space? And is it really thinking more globally? Is it thinking about, like our indigenous elders used to say, 7 generations ahead? Are we making sure we do no harm and do good? Add to the greater good. So that's level 7. But people think a lot of times that that's more linear, but it's not. What we know is that can't be an afterthought. The organizations that have their eye on the whole spectrum are much, much, much more successful organizations, and that data's in. So you do want to be thinking broad spectrum there, and you should be measuring. That's what I do. I do small group assessments. I have a package for that, where we come in and get the metrics, find out, what is it that people value? Where is it that what is this culture? And what does it want to be? So because, people, one of the problems with leadership is they often feel like they have to pull people along, and they have to bribe people or have a lot of charisma and convince them, or, there's just all these ways, because they don't realize that all they have to do is build culture and everybody's there. If you build it consciously and inclusively and transparently, then your unique culture will manifest in a way that's productive, in a way that you can stay accountable for, that you can develop over time, you can connect the dots. And as we measure these negative values that I was talking about before, we get measurements on entropy. And entropy is a term borrowed from physics. It's energy not going toward mission fulfillment, right? So it's energy kind of leaking from the system. Well, if I'm at the coffee pot gossiping about so-and-so and talking about how I'm not going to help them do anything, that's entropy, because that's energy. That I'm not at the coffee pot saying, what are you working on? How can I support you? And I had this really good idea about what you were saying the other day. And, what do you think about what I was talking about? Imagine how different, how much more productive that second conversation is. And we can actually track that and measure it, and then do the math with paychecks. And this gets very real very fast. It becomes from the metaphysical to the physical. We can make that leap very, very quickly.
I do in marketing, I do a lot of analytics to sentiment in like email communications and web pages. And, and it's really interesting when you start putting numbers to how the sentiment, to the positive and negative language and in behaviors, in this case, behaviors, but you're right, it starts to become real very, very quickly when you look at a web page, right? And you see that there's, 12% of the entire language on the web page is negative verbiage and negative associated words or statements, and it's like, well, there's a good reason why your page isn't converting, why people aren't happy to click to the next step. But it's the same thing in the workplace too, right? If you build these series of negative conversations all the time, then things become negative, and then you wonder why performance drops and people leave, and you can't find employees to hire. You can't keep people there, and when they are there, they're disengaged. It's the same really end.
This in terms of mojo. And mojo is that spark, that pizzazz, that juice, that life pulse that makes life, right? We could put all the elements of grape in a lab dish, but we can't make a grape because we don't have that metaphysical capacity to create that sort of spark. Right? So when people are sparked, and that doesn't mean that they're happy-go-lucky, really like crazed or anything. It just means there's an aliveness there. And again, some cultures will support that kind of aliveness, just like a culture in a lab dish would, and some cultures will not support it. But the cultures that do, you've got that kind of, there's an energy, there's a momentum, there's a connectivity, there's a trust, there's an ability to make a mistake and know you're not going to be pushed from behind over that or in any way kind of made wrong for that there's possibility, that the possibility is always unfolding and opening up. But, you want to do that in a container of knowing, where do we want to go? How do we want to channel this mojo? That's a leader's job, is because that's an invisible power. Mojo is a powerful energy. It's the human will, the human spirit, right? And when you compromise that, people will go deader and deader and deader, to the extent that you're compromising it. But to the extent that you are stoking the mojo, people will stay the extra hour. They'll think the more creative thought. They'll do the extra work to stay in a partnership, even when it gets tough. It's stakeholder loyalty is incredible when you do this work. You get the customers come back,
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, right? Because those organizations that have a lot of that mojo, really have that mojo working, it's really easy to tell when somebody enters the organization whether they're a fit or not too, right? Because they either jump right into the mojo or they don't.
I think you have to be careful with this, because sometimes an organization really likes to bring in a whole lot of clones. I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but too much sameness mojo doesn't spark. You need the yin and the yang. I use yin and yang lot in my book as a way to explain things, right? And the positive and the negative, if you don't have both in the wall, you're not going to have electricity. But it's very easy to say we're all a bunch of extroverts, that introvert's not going to fit. But you need that deeper thinker. You
Mhm.
need that one that will sit back and listen. In fact, you need more than the one.
Of
You
course, yeah.
some kind of equanimity between all of this. And that's why I also like the cultural rather than, well, it's not an instead, but, like Myers-Briggs or some of the more personality-based assessment. It's kind
Mhm.
of like, well, what do you do with this psychological information? It's good information, but it tends to fade away quickly. It tends to create some very important bridging in a relationship, but it doesn't bring people into coherence with one another. And that's what you're trying to build. Culture is all about coherence.
Yep.
And people cohere around values. So that's how values help to build the culture. So that's what you're working on, is that coherence. And it takes, some real variety to get a dynamic coherence. You want that dynamism.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've worked with people all over the world, and sometimes that's very frustrating, but oftentimes I find that their cultural differences cause them to look at problems in different ways, and as a result, when we come down to truly solving that problem or how we're looking at that problem, it's a totally different methodology than I would personally go with, but not in a bad way. It pushes. I think when you have that diversity of personalities and diversity of different physical cultures, right, when it comes to global, but even now with remote work being such a prevalent thing, you can have people all over the world on your team.
We're talking to the choir here. I do a lot of work with the United Nations. So this morning people were on my call from all over Africa, Asia, Europe.
But it's so interesting when you can bring all of that together and have an output, whatever that output be something totally different than what you thought it was going to be when you started.
This is why I like to measure, because totally different than who thought, right? When you get this collective, all-inclusive data, and there isn't one person who's interpreting what the thinking was, but it actually is there for them to interpret together. This is why I think it's so important to measure, because there's a lot of subjectivity in this domain, right? In the domain of metaphysics, that's kind of in some ways all that we have. But that's why, I like the wisdom stuff, and I like the wonky stuff. I like to be a wise wonk. I like the data. I like to be, bring in that piece, because what happens is a lot of organizations want to deal with these so-called softer issues, although there's no evidence to say that they're any softer, but for these, what I call more yin distinctions, these more yin, but there's no purpose or container or coherence around it. And so it's just these one-off things, which are better than nothing, but they don't really hit the mark in terms of jazzing the culture, in terms of stoking the mojo.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think one of the biggest challenges that people have with culture is everything in business. In the business mindset, everybody says quantify, 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 measure, measure, measure. And if there's no objective measure to things, then oftentimes they're just pushed off the deep end because, well, we can't measure it, so we never know if we're going to be successful with it.
Well, that's why, that's why I love these Barrett tools that I use. They've been used all over the world in many thousands of situations. They're available in 27 different languages, but the tools are very consistent, whether you're measuring a small group or a larger group or doing a 360 around a leader. We get all this coherent data that can be tracked over time, but it's data around these more metaphysical factors like values, like purpose, like, we get a chance. We can also break these down into the 5 P's: people, planet, purpose, peace, and prosperity. So we want, we want to measure on a fuller spectrum of what really constitutes success, because like where we started with this, the world doesn't define success anymore the same way. And we can actually, we have broadened out the understanding of success, but there's a lot of shooting in the dark about what's going to really bring it about. And so we might do a picnic over here, we might give to a shelter over there, but we don't have that coherent, streamlined, because we haven't done the interweaving work that it takes to build this kind of cultural strength. But then, oh my goodness, the sky's the limit. When people take the time to do this, the sky's the limit. The problem is they usually try to reach for the sky and then turn around and think, maybe I'll get back to this someday. But this is the scaffolding for reaching the sky.
Fantastic. We're going to pause for just a moment because I do need to thank my affiliate partner, Cowork Hub Virtual, creating really a sense of place in a remote work world for consultants, coaches, freelancers, solopreneurs. Super, super cool platform. This is like Zoom on steroids. You can see who else is on the platform. You get an office where you can do video conferencing. You get back to some of that water cooler chat that we've lost over the last year. Definitely go ahead and check them out, coworkhubvirtual.com. You can find out all the information, see a tour of the platform as well. And if you mention you found them on the Winning Tactics, they will give you a free branded background with your logo in place. Super, super cool platform. I use it for my own personal office. And I definitely strongly encourage you to check them out, especially if you're tired of setting calendar invites for all those crazy Zoom links. All right. So we've been talking a lot of the subjective pieces of culture up until this point. I want to flip gears just a little bit, and I want to talk about how we get to measuring culture from a more objective place, and obviously you have access to some tools that make this a little bit easier, but I know there's some ways from a business perspective that we can start to even take some of these steps to measure culture in an objective manner. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, you can just ask people what they value. What do they value them personally, themselves, just in their own lives? And then what do they value about the workplace? And what values would they like to see fulfilled in the workplace? That's the basis of what we do with these tools. Is people go online. It takes about 20 minutes. And the first screen says, what are your personal values? And out of lots of values, people choose 10. The second screen says, what are the current organizational values? And this is where we start to see some of those entropy numbers start to show up. Right? They may say too much control or, things like that. And then, it's also where you get to see, like, what are people really agreeing on? What are we strong on here? Where's the coherence in this organization? And then they say, what's the aspired to organization? What do we want it to be? Where are we headed on this? And when you get that group agreement in data, it's not the boss or the lead, even a good leader coming in and saying, folks, today we're going here. I mean, to some extent, a leader is a leader, and so to some extent, yes, is going to do that. But knowing who and exactly what, and having that group vision, that's a lot of what emerges from this is the group vision, and taking the time to build that group vision, even having just a round conversation among your teammates and saying, what are we building? What are you building? What are you personally building by coming to work every day? Right? And what are we collectively doing here together? What is it that we want to make happen? Yes, of course, at the end of the day, we want to, like I said, level one, we want the lights to be on and profits to be happening. And, that's just basic. That's just level one. But how you get there and the quality of people's work and life, and work is critical in everyone's life. That's where we... many of it, most of us put out our purpose. It's certainly where we put out most of our hours. So, to bring that around in a really responsible way for a leader to say, this matters. We're going to measure what matters. That's really what it comes down to, is we measure what matters. If you're not measuring your culture, then it's not mattering enough for you to really be have the full capacity you could have with it. And it is where the magic happens. It is really, I like to tell the story of if you have two different leaders, both have pretty much the same background of people, the same number, and comparable staff. You have comparable materials, comparable date, calendars. One produces innovation, amazing results. The team's just ready for more, and they produced all kinds of possibilities for future things out of that project. They came in on time. The other one, the end result is a little shaky. They might have lost an employee, or whether they checked out in the physical world or in the metaphysical world. They've lost some of their resources. They've lost some percentage of human resource. And they've lost a lot else, and so that's what you want, is you want to account for that. You want to be accountable for it.
Yeah, I think that's really.
Let me just finish that thought. Sorry.
Yep.
The difference is metaphysical. These two leaders have the same training. What's the difference? That's what my book is about, the alchemy of power. That's the alchemical difference. One leader had the wherewithal to create alchemy. He created more than she created more than the sum of parts, right? The first leader may have not even produced quite the sum of parts. Mm-hmm. And the second one produced more than the sum of parts. Where did that come from? Where did that extra boost of excellence? Where did that extra edge of success? Where did that come from? It's sourced by culture. And it's sourced by the leader developing themselves as full human beings. And I have the whole middle part of my book is about that, is about applying this on a leader's desk. And the third part is that the world is going here. The world is changing with the sustainable development goals, with all the new things that are emerging, and with where people are with a different world coming out of COVID. The world is going to a new paradigm of how it does what it does, how it goes around, And so the third part of the book is being able to is how to navigate that, and every chapter ends with coaching questions, so you kind of get a coaching opportunity throughout the book.
I love that, and I love where you go with that, because I've seen it work in my own personal journey. And when I was very just first into leadership, first team I ever was in charge of, for about a month, I was trying to figure everything out. My calendar was booked, and I wouldn't say I was checked out on the team, but I definitely wasn't as engaged in the team as I should have been. Once I kind of got the lay of the land and figured out my flow of what I had to get done, I started to build time into my calendar to take and have just a 1 to 2 minute touch point with every single person on the team every single day. It wasn't more than, hey, how's your day going? Anything I can help you with? Is I walk by their desk, right? But just in that, over the course of 30 days, I went from a team that was totally disengaged, that just showed up and did absolutely only what they had to a team that wanted to, break records. And, we ended up hitting stretch goals for months and months and months on end. Just as a result of it.
It's not fluffy, right?
It's not fluffy. It's not fluffy at all, but it's so true when I look at just the polarity of how I was when I first started, as I was, just a crazy, oh my gosh, I'm in a leadership position. I got all these responsibilities. I got to figure out how to get all this stuff done. Plus I still have people, right? And once that kind of balance happened and I was able to get back focused on the people, that's when the magic really started to happen, and my life got infinitely easier.
Yeah.
So I always like to end my shows with a final thought, something that our audience can take away and apply into their business tomorrow. So I leave the floor to you for a final thought based on what we've talked about today.
Every day, ask yourself, how's my mojo? And when you get into your workplace, just look around and say, how's the mojo here? Is it flowing? Is it stuck? Is mojo can go retro? Is it going retro? Is your mojo retro? Is your mojo progressive? Is it unfolding? Is it jazz? Are you jazzed? Is that life pulse throbbing? Check in on that piece, and you'll be amazed of how much rocket fuel comes into your work from that.
Absolutely fantastic final thoughts. I love it. I will be checking on my mojo every day because I'm my own personal meanest boss. But somebody's got to keep me in line for sure. So, where can people find you if they want to find out more about what you're doing, or maybe buy your book?
They can find my book, The Alchemy of Power, on Amazon. And I'm Joni Carley, and it's The Alchemy of Power, Mastering the Invisible Factors of Leadership. You can also go to my website. It's jonicarley.com. And you'll see on there under consulting that I offer a small group package, which is perfect for entrepreneurs. And we really get in and get a good, clean measurement. We work it through and debrief with you on what to make out of it, on what it all means. I don't sell generic packages, right? When we do the assessment, then we figure out what do we consult about based on the data in your needs, the data on your needs, and including the data on where your organization says it wants to go.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. We will definitely make sure we get all of your links into the show notes as well so that people can find you. As always, you can catch us on YouTube, all your favorite podcasting channels, and here on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitch every Tuesday. And we definitely appreciate everybody taking time to come and watch the show. And those of you catching us on replay, we appreciate you as well. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate your knowledge and everything you brought to the show. And we will see you all again next week. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Bye.
Well, that wraps up yet another episode of the Winning Tactics Podcast. You can find Adam on both the LinkedIn and Facebook platforms. And to support the show and ensure the success of the podcast, would you kindly consider visiting Patreon.com/Adam Sinkus? We greatly appreciate it. And until next time, from the Winning Tactics Podcast, remember, culture is how your team behaves when no one is looking. Take good care, and thanks for listening.